Today we're going to be talking about ferns, the fern life cycle. And when I talk about ferns, most of us think of these frondy green-like plants. And I went out to a fern and I actually picked one of these fronds. This is what we think of. This is actually the dominant generation, the generation that we're most familiar with is this big green frondy type plant. And if you look around the fronds, every now and then you'll find a special frond called a reproductive frond. And this frond is going to contain little brown dots. These little brown dots are collectively called sori. And each brown dot is a sorus. And inside the sorus are spores. Hundreds to thousands of spores are going to be released into the air. And this is going to lead to the next generation of ferns. So let's go ahead and start with the dominant generation. In this case, the dominant generation is the sporophyte. So I'm going to put sporophyte on top because that's our dominant generation. So sporophyte. And then down below I'm going to write gametophyte. Now again, the sporophyte is going to produce spores. And the gametophyte is going to produce gametes. Let's go ahead and connect them up. Now, sporophyte is going to be 2N. It means it has two of each type of chromosome, two sets of chromosomes, and everybody else is going to be haploid. So they all contain one set of chromosomes. And let's go up here and draw our fern. This big frondy fern is what we're used to seeing. And again, every now and then we see a frond that contains these brown dots. These brown dots are collectively called sori, and singular would be sorus. And the sorus produces lots and lots of spores. And those spores will eventually grow into the next generation. Remember, we're going to alternate back and forth between diploid and haploid generations. So we've got our fern. Fern is going to produce spores. The sporophyte form of the fern is going to produce spores. The spores are going to fall, some of those spores are going to land in just the right place, and they're going to begin to grow into a gametophyte. And this is the generation that most of us have never seen. And it's difficult to see because it's small. Turns out the gametophyte form of a plant actually looks like a heart. And this gametophyte is going to be about a ½ inch in size. So the gametophyte is literally about the size of your little pinky nail there. So it's very small, it's easily overlooked. And it does produce roots. These are true roots because they contain vascular tissue, xylem and phloem. So they actually are true roots. Let's go ahead and label this gametophyte. There we go. Now, growing off this gametophyte, or part of this gametophyte, are going to be two organs, two reproductive organs. One is going to be antheridia, and it's going to produce sperm. And the other organ is going to be archegonia, and it's going to produce eggs. Now what's going to happen here is a sperm from a nearby gametophyte is going to swim over and fertilize the egg. You might say, well, why does a sperm from a nearby gametophyte have to come over here? Why doesn't a sperm right here? It looks like it's a lot closer. Well, if the gametophyte fertilized itself, that would reduce genetic diversity, and nature doesn't like to do that. So there are actually barriers called prezygotic barriers that prevent a sperm of the same gametophyte from fertilizing itself. So we want a sperm from a different gametophyte, a separate fern that's genetically different, to swim over and fertilize this, because that's going to maximize genetic diversity, and that's going to help the plant evolve over time. So that's a good thing. Now once fertilization occurs, then we're actually going to begin to grow the next generation of fern, that frondy fern plant that you're so used to seeing. So let's go ahead and label that so we don't get confused. That is going to be our sporophyte generation. And again, if we look at the cells, all the cells of the gametophyte are going to be haploid, and all the cells of the sporophyte are going to be diploid cells. So they're two different plants. Now eventually this sporophyte is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger until it literally crushes the little gametophyte and ends up killing it. And that's just by design. That's just the way it is. So the big difference here between the moss life cycle and the fern life cycle is in the moss life cycle, the sporophyte grew right off the top of the gametophyte, and the two kind of live together, physically connected. With the fern life cycle, the two generations, the sporophyte, that frondy generation, and the gametophyte, the heart-shaped generation, are going to be independent of each other. They're literally going to be separate, physically separated from each other. Only for a short period of time is the sporophyte going to grow off of the gametophyte, but eventually it's going to get bigger, it's going to kill this gametophyte off, and then that's going to be it. So the two generations live independently of each other. They live separately from each other. They're not physically connected. Now the last thing we want to do is write down how do we get from here to here and how do we get from here to here. Now again, whenever we're going from end to end, haploid to haploid, same number of chromosomes, we're going to use the process of mitosis. So end to end, mitosis. End to end, mitosis. And remember, we've got sperm and egg, those are our gametes. So the sperm of another plant is going to swim over and fertilize the egg to produce the next sporophyte. So N plus N, the N of a sperm plus the N of an egg, come together, 2N, fertilization. And then our sporophyte's going to grow, it's going to produce spores ultimately. How does it produce spores? How do we get from 2N to N? How do we reduce the number of chromosomes in half? That is going to be through the process of meiosis. And that's going to be it for the fern life cycle.